If you are afraid that you will be alone for the rest of your life, that you will never be chosen, never be loved the way you long to be, that you will simply grow old by yourself and no one will be there, then this hour was made for you. You can set it down here. The fear that runs ahead of you into all the empty years you imagine, the ache that flares every time someone asks if you are seeing anyone, or whether you have a family. The quiet of a home where no one is waiting for you. For the length of this hour, you do not have to pretend you are fine with it, and you do not have to perform contentment you do not feel. Here, in this quiet, you are allowed to simply be a person who longs to be loved, and is frightened of a future without it, and is tired of carrying that fear alone. And no one here is going to hand you a slogan, or tell you to just trust the timing, or make you feel ashamed for wanting what almost every human heart has always wanted. I know that this is one of the loneliest aches to talk about, because it can feel almost embarrassing to admit out loud, as though wanting love so much were a kind of weakness, as though a strong or spiritual person should be above it. So you carry it quietly, behind a capable and cheerful face, and most of the people in your life have no idea how much it weighs or how often it visits you in the dark. If that is you, then let this hour be the one place you do not have to hide it. You do not have to be embarrassed by your longing here. You do not have to minimize it or joke it away or pretend you have made your peace with something you have not made your peace with. You can let it be exactly as real and as heavy as it is, and you will be met with nothing but gentleness and the steady, kind voice of a God who put that longing in you and is not ashamed of it at all. I want you to know you did not find this by accident. Maybe it is late, and the house is quiet in that particular way it gets when there is no one else in it, and the fear came to sit with you the way it does on these nights. Maybe a wedding invitation came today, or a friend announced good news, and it pressed on the tender place. Maybe you simply typed into a search bar something you would never say out loud. Something like, "What if I'm alone forever?" However you got here, you are here now, and I am glad. So stay with me for this hour, because we are not going to do what the world does with this fear, which is to either dismiss it or try to fix it with empty reassurance. We are going to sit honestly with how deep it goes, and then we are going to look at what God Himself says about your aloneness and your longing and your future, in His own words. And we are going to look at the true stories of real people in the Scriptures and in our own history who faced this exact fear, who were alone by the world's measure, and who discovered they were never, for one moment, forgotten. Let me start by telling you what I think this has actually been like, because the fear of being alone forever is a particular kind of ache, and most people who have not felt it do not understand it at all. I think the weddings are hard, the invitations that come, the celebrations you are happy to attend and somehow also have to brace yourself for, where you watch two people promise each other the very thing you are afraid you will never have. You are genuinely glad for them, and at the same time, something in you aches, quietly, in a way you would never say out loud, because it feels small and ungenerous to ache at someone else's joy. But it is not small. It is the sound of a deep longing pressing against a deep fear, and it is right there every time the music plays and the two of them turn to walk back down the aisle together. I think the ordinary questions catch you off guard. Are you seeing anyone? Do you have a family of your own yet? Asked kindly, asked casually, asked by people who mean nothing by it, and yet they land somewhere tender, and you give your practiced answer, the light deflection, the change of subject, while inside something tightens. You have learned to manage your face in those moments, but you carry the small sting of them home. I think you feel, sometimes, like the odd one out, like an extra, the single friend in a world that seems to be organized 2 by 2. You have aged out of the young singles, and you do not quite belong among the married couples with their kids and their school schedules and their shared life. And there is a no man's land in between, where you sometimes feel you are standing all alone, not quite fitting anywhere, watching everyone else move into a stage of life you are afraid you will never enter. I think the quiet of the home is its own particular thing. The way the floor creaks and there is no one to hear it but you. The meals cooked for one, or not cooked at all because what is the point? The day's small news with no one to tell it to over dinner. Someone once described what the heart most longs for as simply this: someone in daily nearness to love. And that may be the truest naming of the ache. It is not always about a wedding, or romance, or even marriage in the abstract. It is about wanting someone near, daily, ordinarily, to love and be loved by, and feeling the empty space where that person is not. I think the holidays can be the hardest of all. The seasons that are built around family and couples. The gatherings where everyone seems to arrive in pairs and you arrive alone. The questions from relatives that come a little sharper at those times. The empty chair at your own table. The days the world insists you should be most surrounded can be the days you feel most alone. And you brace for them on the calendar long before they come. I think the little glowing screens make it worse. The way they parade everyone else's coupled happiness in front of you. The engagement photos, the anniversary posts, the growing families. You scroll, and every image is a small reminder of the thing you do not have. And even though you know it is only the highlight reel, only the curated best of other people's lives, it still presses on the bruise, again and again, until you put the phone down feeling lonelier than before you picked it up. I think, for some of you, there is the quiet pressure of time, the sense of a clock running, the fear that the window is closing, that with each passing year the odds feel longer and the hope feels thinner. And that particular fear has a sharpness to it, a sense of something slipping away that you cannot get back, that can make the loneliness feel not just sad, but urgent, almost panicked. On the hard nights, I think if you have tried to find someone, the trying itself has worn you down. The dating that goes nowhere, the apps that turn the deep human longing for love into something that feels like a tired transaction, the hopes raised and dashed, the conversations that fizzle, the rejections, the people who did not choose you, and the people you could not make yourself want. Hope itself becomes exhausting after a while, because every time you let yourself hope, you risk the fall. And after enough falls, a part of you starts to wonder whether it is safer to stop hoping at all. And I think there are the practical fears that no one talks about, that creep in late at night. Who will be my emergency contact? Who will take care of me if I get sick? Who will be there when I am old and frail? Whose name do I even put down on the form? These are not romantic longings. They are the bare, practical questions of a human being who is afraid of facing the hard parts of life with no one beside them. And they are real, and they deserve to be taken seriously, not waved away. I think the fear is not really about today, though. It is about the future. You can manage a single evening. What frightens you is the long road of them, stretching out ahead, growing old with no one beside you. No one to care for you when you are frail. No one who would even notice if you did not wake up one morning. The fear of dying alone, unmissed, is one of the coldest fears a human being can carry, and it can come at you hardest in the dark, when there is nothing to distract you from the imagined years. I think the people who love you have sometimes made it worse without meaning to. The well-meant advice that it will happen when you stop looking. The cheerful certainty that the right one is out there somewhere. The platitudes that are meant to comfort and instead make you feel like your real fear is being waved away. Like no one is willing to sit with you in the actual possibility that it might not happen. And underneath the kindness, sometimes a faint pressure, as though your singleness were a problem to be solved, a thing slightly wrong with you, rather than a circumstance you did not choose and cannot simply fix by trying harder. I think you compare yourself, even though you know you should not, and the comparison always seems to leave you behind. The friends who married young, the ones on their second or third child, the ones buying homes and planning anniversaries, all of them seeming to move forward through the expected stages of life while you stand still, watching the distance grow. It is not that you begrudge them. It is that every milestone of theirs quietly marks one you have not reached, until it can feel as though everyone else got the manual for how life is supposed to go, and you alone were handed a blank page. That sense of being left behind, of falling out of step with everyone you know, is one of the lonelier feelings there is, and it presses hardest at exactly the ages when the world expects these things to have happened already. I think for some of you this fear has a different shape, because you are not always alone. You are married, and now you are not, through death or divorce, and the fear is not of never having had love, but of never having it again. The empty side of the bed, the habits built for two now carried out alone. The particular grief of having known what it is to share a life and then to have it taken, and to face the rest of the way without it, afraid that your one chance at it is behind you. And here is something I want to say carefully, because almost no one says it. The ache you feel is not a flaw in you. It is not weakness, and it is not a lack of faith, and it is not something to be ashamed of. The longing to be loved, to be known, to share your life with someone, to not be alone, is one of the truest and most human things about you. And we are going to see in a moment that God Himself is the one who put it there, and the one who called the absence of it not good. So if anyone has made you feel that a real Christian would not struggle with this, that you should simply be content and stop wanting it, set that down. Your longing is not the problem. It is holy, and it is heard. And I think, underneath all of it, there is the deepest question, the spiritual one you may not have said out loud. Does God see this part of my life? Does He care that I am alone? Has He forgotten this corner of my heart while He tends to everyone else's? And the colder one, the one that comes at 3 a.m, am I alone because something is wrong with me? Because I am not worth choosing? Because even God has passed me over? If that question has ever formed itself in the dark, then hear the rest of this hour, because it is the answer to exactly that. If any of that is close to true, then hear this. Before we go one step further, you are not alone. Even though this fear has convinced you that you are uniquely, permanently so. There are countless people lying awake tonight with this exact ache. Good and lovely and worthy people whom the world has simply not yet paired off. And their aloneness is not a verdict on their worth, and neither is yours. And the God we are going to talk about tonight does not see you the way a crowded room sees you, as the one without a partner. He sees you as His own beloved, fully known, never overlooked. And He has a great deal to say to the fear that is sitting on your chest tonight. So let us begin with the thing almost no one will tell you, which is that your longing itself comes from Him. And let me say one more thing into the heart of the loneliness. Before we go to the Word, the very fact that you ache for connection is proof of something beautiful about you. That you were made for love. That your heart is still soft enough to long. That the disappointments have not yet hardened you into not caring. There are people who have buried this longing so deep under cynicism or distraction or self-protection that they no longer feel it at all. And that is a sadder state than yours, not a safer one. Your tender, aching, hoping heart is not broken. It is alive. It is working exactly as God designed a human heart to work, reaching for the love it was made for. And a heart like that, a heart still capable of longing, is a heart God can fill. Do not despise your own longing as a weakness. It is the very thing that keeps you open to the God who is reaching back toward you. Because the very first time the word alone appears in all of Scripture, it is God who says it. And He says it is not good. In the beginning, when God was making the world, at the end of each day, He looked at what He had made and called it good. The light, good. The seas, good. The stars, the creatures, the whole green and breathing earth, good, good, good. And then, in the middle of all that goodness, God looked at the one human being He had made and said the first not good in the entire Bible. He said, "It is not good that the man should be alone." Sit with that. Before there was any sin in the world, before anything had gone wrong, the one thing God identified as not good was a person being alone. Your ache is not a defect. It is an echo of the heart of God Himself, who looked at aloneness and said, "This is not how it was meant to be." The longing you carry to not be alone is woven into you by the very hand that made you. And God is not annoyed by it, and He is not asking you to pretend it away. He named it first. He understands it better than you do. This matters more than it may seem, because so much of the extra suffering around loneliness comes not from the loneliness itself, but from the shame piled on top of it. The voice that says you should not feel this way, that wanting love so badly means something is wrong with you, that a mature believer would have risen above it. That voice is a liar. God Himself looked at aloneness and called it not good. He built you for connection on purpose. The ache you feel is simply your design working as it was meant to, your God-given hunger for the thing God Himself said you were not meant to be without. You can stop fighting the longing as though it were an enemy. It is not your enemy. It is a holy hunger, and it is pointing you, in the end, toward the only one who can fully fill it, even as you also, rightly, long for a person to share your days. So we begin here, with the longing honored, not dismissed, and then we move to the thing God does about it, which is more wonderful than you may have been told. Because the God who said it is not good to be alone is also, by His own description, the God who does something very specific about aloneness. The Scripture says, "God setteth the solitary in families." Read that slowly. God setteth the solitary, the alone, the single, the ones with no one, in families. It is, in a sense, His specialty. It is one of the things He tells us about His own character, that He takes the people who are by themselves and gives them belonging. Now hear this carefully, because it matters. This does not always mean He gives a husband or a wife. Sometimes He does, and that is a real and good gift. But the promise here is bigger and surer than that, and it does not collapse if marriage never comes. God sets the solitary in families. He builds belonging for the lonely, weaves them into communities, gives them people, makes families out of the unlikeliest gatherings of souls, in ways you cannot predict and could never engineer. The fear says you will be solitary forever. The God who made you says that setting the solitary into family is one of the very things He does. And look at the kinds of families He builds, because they are wider and stranger and more wonderful than the one the fear keeps picturing. The fear shows you only one shape of belonging: the husband or wife, the children, the conventional household, and it tells you that if you do not get that exact shape, you will have nothing. But God builds families out of all sorts of materials. He builds them out of deep friendships that become closer than blood. He builds them out of churches that truly become homes. He builds them out of the people you serve and the people who serve alongside you, out of nieces and nephews and neighbors and the spiritual children you pour your life into. The belonging He gives the solitary very often does not look like the one the fear demands, and yet it can be every bit as real, every bit as warm, every bit as much a family. Do not let the fear convince you that there is only one door to belonging, and that it is closed. God has more doors than you can count, and He is in the business of opening them for exactly the people who feel most shut out. And He says it even more tenderly. For the one who has known the sting of being left, He says, "When my father and my mother forsake me, then the Lord will take me up." When the people who were supposed to be there are not, when even the most basic belonging fails, God Himself stoops down and takes you up, gathers you in, becomes the belonging that did not come from anywhere else. There is no level of alone that is beneath His reach. There is no abandonment so complete that He will not step into it and take you up. Now let me show you a real person from the Scriptures who lived this. A woman whose whole long life was marked by exactly the aloneness you fear, and who found it was anything but empty. Her name was Anna. We meet her near the very beginning of the story of Jesus, an old woman in the temple in Jerusalem. And the Scripture tells us her story in just a few quiet lines, but those lines hold a whole life. She had been married, it says, for 7 years from her youth. Only 7 years. And then her husband died, and she was a widow. And she remained a widow for the long rest of her life, all the way to the age of 84 years, 84 years old. Alone by every measure the world uses. No husband, no mention of children. Decade after decade after decade of what the world would call a lonely life. But look at what she did with those years, because it changes everything. The Scripture says she departed not from the temple, but served God with fastings and prayers night and day. She gave her long, single, alone life entirely to God. She filled the years that could have been empty with His presence, with prayer, with worship, with a nearness to God so constant that the temple became her home and the Lord became her companion. From the outside, someone might have looked at her and thought, "What a sad, lonely life. An old widow who never remarried, who spent her days in the temple." But anyone who looked at her face would have seen something else entirely. A woman lit from within by a lifetime of communion with God, the least lonely person in Jerusalem. And here is how God honored that life. When Mary and Joseph brought the infant Jesus into the temple, that old widow, who had given her decades of aloneness to God, was one of the very first people on earth to see the Messiah. to recognize him, to know that the one the whole world had been waiting for had finally come. While the powerful and the partnered and the busy missed it entirely, Anna, the lonely old widow, was right there, because she had spent her single life close to God, and so she was standing exactly where she needed to be to meet him. Her aloneness was not wasted. It was the very thing that positioned her for the greatest moment of her life. The years the world pitied were the years that made her ready to see God in the flesh. And notice that the scripture remembers her name. Out of all the thousands of people who passed through that temple in those years, the busy and the important and the partnered and the powerful, it is the name of one old single widow that God saw fit to write down forever, so that we would still be speaking of her thousands of years later. The world forgets the lonely. It builds its monuments to the famous and the coupled and the successful. But God keeps a different record. He noticed the faithful old woman that everyone else walked past, and he made sure her name and her devotion would outlast every king and every general of her age. If you fear that an alone life is a forgotten life, that you will pass through this world unremembered, look at Anna. The God who writes the real history does not overlook the faithful soul in the corner. He sees, and he remembers. And in his book, the quiet, prayerful, lonely-looking life can be written in letters that never fade. Hear this, you who fear a long, alone life. A single life, an alone life, poured out toward God, is not an empty life. It can be one of the fullest, most fruitful, most God-saturated lives there is. Anna proves it. The aloneness you dread is not the same thing as emptiness, and in God's hands, it can become the soil where the deepest closeness to Him grows. Let me step out of the teaching for just a moment. If this is reaching you tonight, if it helps even a little to hear that your aloneness is seen and that it need not be empty, I would gently say this. There are so many people listening who carry this exact fear and have told almost no one how heavy it gets on the quiet nights. If you want to, you can write one word in the comments below. Just write, "Here," so the rest of us know you are there, and so you know you are not the only one awake tonight with this ache. You do not have to, but there is something about one quiet word offered into the company of others who understand that takes a little of the loneliness out of it. And if this has been a comfort, you are welcome to follow along, so it can find you again the next time the fear gets loud. That is all. Now, let me tell you about two women in the scriptures who were utterly alone in the world, and what God did with their story. Their names were Naomi and Ruth, and their story begins in about as much loss and aloneness as two people can know. Naomi was an older woman who had gone with her husband and her two sons to live in a foreign country during a famine, and then, one after another, everything was taken from her. Her husband died, and then both of her sons died, and she was left an aging woman in a foreign land with no husband, no children, no provider, no future. In a world where a woman without men in her life had almost nothing to stand on, she was as alone as a person could be. When she finally went back to her homeland, the women of her town hardly recognized her, and she said to them, "Do not call me Naomi," which means pleasant. "Call me Mara," which means bitter. "For I went out full, and the Lord has brought me home again empty." Empty. That was the word she used for her own life. I went out full, and I have come home empty. But she was not entirely alone, because one of her son's widows, a young foreign woman named Ruth, refused to leave her. Ruth was herself a widow, young, with her own whole future of probable loneliness ahead of her, and she could have gone home to her own people and tried to start again. Instead, she clung to her grieving mother-in-law and said those famous words, "Where you go, I will go. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God." Two widows, two alone women, one old and bitter with loss, one young and facing an uncertain future, with no men, no security, nothing but each other, walking back to an empty house. And here is what God did, quietly, the way He so often works. In that homeland, there was a man named Boaz, a relative of Naomi's late husband, a kind and honorable man. And through a series of ordinary providences, small things, a field, a harvest, a chance meeting that was not chance at all, Boaz took notice of Ruth and showed her kindness, and in time took her as his wife and became a redeemer for that empty, broken little family. The two solitary women were set into a family, and Ruth, the foreign widow, had a son. And the women who had watched Naomi come home empty now gathered around her as she held that baby on her lap. And they said to her, "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer." The woman who had named herself Empty was now cradling a grandchild against her chest. And the story does not even stop there, because this is where it becomes almost too wonderful. That baby, Obed, grew up and had a son named Jesse, and Jesse had a son named David, who became the greatest king Israel ever knew. And generations later, from that very same family line, in the very same little town, was born Jesus, the Messiah, the Savior of the world. Do you see it? The lonely story of two widows who had nothing but each other was not a forgotten footnote. God wove it directly into the central story of all history, the line that led to the Savior. The woman who said her life was empty was holding, on her lap, a link in the chain that led to the King of Kings. So hear this. You who fear your aloneness is the end of your story, that it is just an empty road going nowhere. Naomi thought the very same thing. She named herself Empty, and God was, even then, quietly weaving her lonely story into the biggest and most beautiful story ever told. You cannot see, from inside the empty season, what God may be doing with it. But the God who set those two solitary women into a family and made their story matter forever is the same God who is writing yours. And He does not waste a lonely chapter. He has a long history of taking the ones who feel most forgotten and placing them right at the heart of what He is doing. And do not miss where God was working in that story, because it was in the small, ordinary, unremarkable things. He did not send an angel or split the sky. He worked through a field that needed harvesting, and a widow who went out to gather leftover grain to survive, and a landowner who happened to walk by, and a series of quiet kindnesses that looked, at the time, like nothing more than ordinary days. Naomi could not see, in the middle of her grief, that God was arranging anything at all. It only became clear looking back. And that is so often how He works in a lonely life, not in dramatic rescues, but in quiet providences. A friendship that forms slowly, a door that opens unexpectedly, A community that gathers almost without your noticing. An ordinary day that turns out, years later, to have been the hinge of everything. You may be in the part of the story where it just looks like empty fields and ordinary days. Naomi was too. God was already at work in hers, and He is already at work in yours, in ways you will probably only recognize when you look back. Now let me speak to the deepest part of this, the part underneath even the longing for a person, because God speaks to it directly, and it is almost startling how tenderly He does. For the one who feels unchosen, unwanted, passed over, left on the shelf, God says something through the prophet Isaiah that He says to no other kind of person. He speaks to the one who feels like a forsaken wife, a woman left alone and grieving. And He says, "Fear not, you shall not be ashamed. You shall forget the shame of your youth, and not remember the reproach of your loneliness anymore." And then He says the astonishing thing. He says, "For your Maker is your husband. The Lord of hosts is His name. Your Maker is your husband." To the one who fears no one will ever fill that place. God Himself stoops down and offers to be the nearest companion of all, to be to your soul what you have longed for a person to be: present, faithful, covenant-bound, never leaving. He says He has called you as a woman who was forsaken and grieved in spirit, and He has gathered you with everlasting kindness. Now, I want to be careful here, because I am not handing you a slogan to paper over a real ache. I am not telling you that God is a substitute who means you should stop wanting a person, or that if you were just spiritual enough, the longing would vanish. That is the dismissive thing people say, and it is not what God is saying. He is saying something deeper. He is saying that underneath your longing for a human companion, which is good and real, there is an even deeper place in you that was made for Him, and that no human being, not even the best spouse, could ever fully fill. People who marry discover this too, that even a wonderful marriage does not reach the very bottom of the soul, because the bottom of the soul was made for God. So, whether or not a person ever comes, there is a companionship available to you right now that goes deeper than marriage, that will never leave you, never die, never grow cold, and never pass you over. Your Maker offers to be your husband. That is not a consolation prize. It is the truest belonging there is, and it is offered to you tonight. And think about the tenderness of the image God chose. Of all the ways He could describe Himself to a lonely heart, He did not pick a distant title. He reached for the most intimate human relationship there is, the closest, most daily, most covenantal bond a person can know. And He said, "That is what I want to be to you, your husband. Not your distant ruler, not your demanding judge, but the one who is nearest, who knows you most fully, who has bound Himself to you forever and will never walk away." He chose that word on purpose, because He knows exactly what your heart is aching for. And He is saying, the deepest version of that, the thing the human longing is really pointing toward, I am offering to be, right now, to you. The forsaken one in Isaiah was not told to stop longing for closeness. She was told that the closeness she longed for was hers, in God, more deeply than she had dared to hope. And the Scripture seals it with a promise that reaches all the way to the end. It says that nothing, neither death, nor life, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all creation shall be able to separate you from the love of God. Whatever else you face alone, you will never, ever face the absence of His love. That is the one companionship that the fear of the future cannot touch, because not even death can end it. And if you think God cannot truly understand this particular ache, that He is too far above it to know what it feels like, then look at His own Son. Jesus knew loneliness from the inside. He was, by all accounts, single His whole earthly life. He knew what it was to be misunderstood by His own family, deserted by His closest friends in His worst hour, left utterly alone when He needed people most. On the night before He died, He said to His friends that the hour was coming when they would all scatter and leave Him alone. And then He said something I want you to hold on to. And yet I am not alone, because the Father is with me. Even abandoned by every human being, He was not alone, because the Father was with Him. That is not a God who looks down on your loneliness from a comfortable distance. That is a God who walked straight through it and came out the other side able to say, "Even here, I am not alone." And so He turns to you and makes you the same promise He lived. "I will not leave you comfortless," He said. "I will come to you, and, lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the world." To the very end. Through every season you fear, every empty evening, every lonely holiday, every frightening question about who will be there when you are old, He says, "I am with you all the way to the end of the world, and I will not leave you comfortless." The fear says you will face the future with no one. He says you will face it with Him, and that He is the one companion who has promised never, ever to leave. Now let me bring you the true story I most want you to hear, of a real woman, not so long ago, who faced this exact fear head-on and found the promise true. Her name was Amy Carmichael. She was an Irish woman, born in a windy little village on the north coast of Ireland, and as a young woman, she gave her life to serve God as a missionary far from home. And early in that life, before she had gone very far, she came face to face with the very fear you are carrying tonight. She was single, and she began to feel the weight of the future, the real possibility that she might be alone for her whole life, that she might never have the marriage and the family that most people have. And it frightened her deeply. So she did something honest and brave. While she was serving for a time in Japan, she went off by herself to a cave to be alone with God and to face the fear instead of running from it. And there, in that cave, the fear came at her with everything it had. She later described how the enemy of her soul whispered to her in that cave, words almost exactly like the ones that whisper to you in the dark. "It is all right now," the voice said. "But what about afterward? What about when you are older? You are going to be very lonely." The very fear you carry, spoken into the dark of a cave more than a century ago, to a frightened young woman who did not know how her life would turn out. And she did not pretend the fear away. She turned to God in desperation and cried out, in essence, "What can I do, Lord? How can I go on to the end of my life like this?" And God answered her, not with a promise of a husband, not with a guarantee about her future circumstances, but with a word from His own scripture that settled into her soul and held her for the rest of her days. He brought to her mind the verse that says, "None of them that trust in me shall be desolate. None of them that trust in me shall be desolate. She said that word stayed with her ever after. She did not manage to conquer the fear by herself or talk herself out of it. She handed it to God, and she took hold of His promise, and she trusted it. And here is how her life unfolded. Amy Carmichael never married. The fear's prediction, in one sense, came true. She did not get the husband, the marriage, the conventional family. She went to India, and she stayed there for more than 50 years without ever coming home. But listen to what God did with her aloneness, because it is the very thing He promised. She began to rescue children, little ones in terrible danger, girls who had no one, and she took them in, and she loved them, and she raised them, and they began to call her Amma, which means mother. By the end of her life, the family that had gathered around this single, never-married woman, the children she had rescued, and the workers who had joined her, numbered around 900 souls. 900. The woman who once trembled in a cave at the thought of being desolate and alone became mother to 900 children. God did not give her a husband. He gave her a family of 900. He set the solitary in a family, exactly as He said He does. The fear of desolation for the one who trusted Him simply did not come true. I tell you her story not to promise you 900 children, and not to say your life will look like hers. It may look very different. I tell you her story because she faced the precise fear that is sitting with you tonight. The fear of growing old, alone, and desolate. And she took it into a cave and handed it to God. And she found that His promise held. None of them that trust in me shall be desolate. She trusted Him, and she was not desolate. Not for one day of her long, single life. Because the God who sets the solitary in families had her, and filled her life past overflowing in a way she could never have imagined from inside that cave. And notice what God gave her in that cave, because it is the same thing He offers you tonight. He did not give her a guarantee about her circumstances. He did not promise her marriage, or tell her how the loneliness would be resolved, or show her the 900 children waiting decades down the road. He gave her a promise about Himself, that the one who trusts Him will not be desolate. That is all she had to walk out of the cave with. A single sentence of Scripture. And it was enough, because the one who spoke it was faithful. You may want God to show you the ending, to promise you the spouse, to prove the loneliness will be fixed in the way you have in mind. He very often will not do that. What He offers instead is better, though it asks more faith. Not a guarantee about your circumstances, but a promise about His character. He will not let the soul that trusts Him be desolate. Hold that, the way Amy held it, and let it be enough to walk out of the cave. Now let me name the lies that this fear has been telling you, because each one needs an answer. The first lie is that you will certainly be alone forever, that it is hopeless, that the future is already decided and it is empty. But you cannot see the future, and neither can the fear. Naomi could not see Boaz from inside her empty grief. Amy Carmichael could not see 900 children from inside that cave. The fear speaks with total certainty about a future that has not happened and that it has no power to predict. You do not actually know how your story ends. What you know is the God who is writing it. And He is the kind of God who sets the solitary in families and weaves empty stories into glorious ones. The hopelessness is a feeling, not a fact. And think of how many people have stood exactly where you stand, certain it would never happen for them, and been wrong. People who had given up, who had made their peace with a single life, and then love came, late and unlooked for. And others for whom it came in the form of a family of friends, or a calling that filled their life so full they could hardly have fit a spouse in it. The one thing almost no one's life turns out to match is the bleak, certain picture the fear paints at 2 a.m. The fear is a poor prophet. It has been confidently wrong about countless lives, and it does not know yours either. The second lie is that your worth depends on being chosen, that if no one picks you, you must not be worth picking. But your worth was never determined by whether another human being selected you. It was determined, settled, fixed forever by the God who made you and who calls you his own beloved, who chose you before the foundation of the world. A person's failure to choose you, or the simple fact that the right person has not yet come, says nothing whatsoever about your value. Any more than a priceless painting becomes worthless because it has not yet been bought. You are not on a clearance shelf, marked down because no one wanted you. You are treasured by the one whose opinion actually sets your worth. And consider how arbitrary the world's choosing actually is. Whether or not you have found a partner depends on 1,000 things that have nothing to do with your worth. Where you happened to live, who happened to cross your path, timing, circumstance, the choices of other people, plain chance. Wonderful, lovely, deeply worthy people are single, and shallow, unkind people sometimes are not. The presence or absence of a ring on your hand measures none of the things that actually make a person precious. Not your kindness, not your faithfulness, not your courage, not the beauty of your soul. So refuse the math that says unchosen equals unworthy. It is bad math. The God who sees all the way to the bottom of you has already pronounced his verdict on your worth, and it is the only verdict that is true. And it does not change with your relationship status. The third lie is that your real life cannot begin until you are not alone, that you are in a waiting room, that everything is on hold until the person comes. But this, right now, is your life, not the dress rehearsal for it, the actual, irreplaceable life God has given you. And it is meant to be lived fully now, not someday. Anna did not put her life on hold waiting for a husband who never came. She filled her years with God and was ready to meet the Messiah. Amy did not wait to start living until she was married. She went and poured her life out and was mother to hundreds. You do not have to wait for a person to begin living a full, rich, meaningful life. The fullness is available now, and the waiting itself can be holy ground. In fact, some of the most important things God ever does in a person, he does in their seasons of waiting. When the thing they want has not yet come, and they have only him to lean on. It is in those very seasons that people often learn to pray most deeply, to know God most personally, to discover who they are apart from anyone else's eyes, to build a faith that does not depend on circumstances. If you spend this season only enduring it, gritting your teeth until real life arrives, you may miss the very gifts God means to give you in it. The waiting room, it turns out, is not a waiting room at all. It is a classroom and a sanctuary. And for many people, it has been the place they came to know God in a way the busy and the partnered never had the stillness to. The fourth lie is that God has forgotten this part of you, that he cares about everything else but has overlooked your loneliness, that this corner of your heart is invisible to him. But the God who said, "It is not good to be alone," who calls himself the one who sets the solitary in families, who stoops to be a husband to the forsaken, is not indifferent to your aloneness. It may be the part of your life he is most tenderly attending to, working in ways underground that you cannot yet see, the way he worked in Naomi's empty years and Amy's frightened cave. You are not overlooked. The very ache you feel is one he named first and feels with you. And remember that God's silence on a matter is not the same as God's absence from it. There may be no visible movement, no answer to your prayers about this that you can point to, no sign that anything is changing, and the fear reads that silence as proof that he does not care or is not there. But you have seen tonight that he is most at work in exactly these quiet, unanswered-looking seasons, doing in the dark what will only become visible in the light. Naomi heard nothing from heaven in her empty grief. God was arranging everything. Do not mistake his quiet for his absence. The seed does its most important growing underground, unseen, before a single green shoot ever breaks the surface. And the fifth lie is the coldest one, and I want to speak to it gently and directly, because it can come in the darkest hours. It is the lie that you will grow old and die alone and unmissed, that no one would even notice if you were gone, that your life does not matter enough for your absence to leave a mark. If that thought has ever come to you in the night, if the loneliness has ever grown so heavy that part of you has wondered whether anyone would care if you simply were not here anymore, then please hear me with everything in me. That is the loneliness lying to you in its very darkest voice, and it is not telling you the truth. You are seen. You are known. Your life matters. To God beyond all measure, and to more people than the fear will let you believe. You would be missed more than you can imagine. Please do not carry that darkness alone. Tell someone, today or tomorrow, a friend, a pastor, a doctor, a counselor, a helpline in your country. Reaching out is not weakness. It is the bravest and rightest thing you can do. You are not a burden, and you are not unmissed, and your life is not nothing. You matter tonight, exactly as you are, alone or not. Let me step out one more time, just briefly, and then we will land this gently. If you have stayed with me this far, thank you for trusting an hour of a lonely night to this. If anything here has eased the ache even a little, you are welcome to stay, so it can keep you company the next time the fear gets loud. And if you wrote that one word earlier, or even only thought it, know that you are seen by the others here who carry the same ache, and far more deeply by the God who said your aloneness is not good, and who sets the solitary in families. No one here will measure you by whether you are paired off, just company, and the word, and the nearness of the God who calls himself the husband of the forsaken. Now let me put a few gentle things into your hands, because comfort that gives you nothing to hold can leave you right where it found you. So here is what I would offer you, not as a formula, and not as a way to earn the thing you long for, but as a few ways to stand and to live while you carry this. First, bring the ache to God honestly, exactly as it is. Do not stuff it down, and do not dress it up as contentment you do not feel. He is not fragile, and he is not disappointed by your longing. Tell him plainly, I am lonely. I am afraid. I want this, and I do not have it. and I do not understand. That honest prayer is worth 1,000 polite ones. Amy Carmichael did not conquer her fear by pretending. She took it into a cave and handed God the raw, frightened truth of it. Do the same. He can hold the whole of it. And do not be afraid to bring him the questions underneath the ache, even the ones that feel almost too raw to pray. Why has this not happened for me when I have wanted it so long? Did you forget me? Do you even care about this part of my life? Those are not faithless questions. They are honest ones, and the scriptures are full of God's people asking them. He would far rather have your honest anguish than your polite distance. Pour it out. Tell him you do not understand. Tell him it hurts, and that you are tired, and that you are afraid. A relationship with God deep enough to hold your loneliness is built by exactly this kind of honesty. And many people have found that the lonely season, precisely because it drove them to pray with such raw honesty, became the season their walk with God grew the deepest roots it ever had. Second, receive God as your companion. Now, not someday. Do not wait until you are married or until the loneliness lifts to draw near to him. The deepest belonging you will ever know is available to you tonight, in the quiet, in the very room where you feel most alone. Talk to him through the ordinary day, the way you would long to talk to a person. Let him be the one you tell the small news to. The companionship of God is not a lesser thing you settle for. It is the truest thing there is. And the people who learn it in their lonely seasons often find a closeness to God that many never discover at all. Practice it in the small and ordinary ways, not just the grand spiritual ones. Talk to him while you make your dinner for one, and let the meal become a meal shared after all. Tell him about your day on the drive home, the way you would long to tell a person. Bring him into the quiet evening instead of only enduring it. Loneliness often lives most sharply in the small, unwitnessed moments, the ones a companion would have filled, and those are exactly the moments God is offering to fill. If you will turn toward him in them instead of only feeling the absence. He is not a distant idea to be believed in. He is a present companion to be lived with, here, in the ordinary hours of an ordinary day. And the more you practice his company in the small moments, the less those moments will ache. Third, do not put your life on hold. Live it now, fully, this one irreplaceable life. Build things, pursue what you love, travel if you can, learn, create. Make a home that is genuinely yours, beautiful and full of life, not a waiting room. Refuse the lie that says everything starts when the person comes. Some of the richest, most meaningful lives ever lived were lived by people who were single, and they did not waste their years waiting. They filled them. There is a quiet danger in a waiting heart. The danger of letting the longed-for future steal the actual present. People can spend years so fixed on the life they do not have that they barely live the one they do, and then look back with a second grief that they let real, good, irretrievable years slip past unlived while they waited for life to start. Do not do that to yourself. The God who holds your future is also the giver of this very day, with its real joys and its real people and its real opportunities to love and be loved. And he means for you to live it, not merely endure it as a layover on the way to somewhere else. If a person comes, wonderful, you will fold a full life into a shared one. But do not hand the fear the power to cancel your present. This day is a gift, and it is not a lesser gift because you are living it alone. Fourth, Build a family of belonging around you, on purpose. God sets the solitary in families, and very often He does it through the family He calls the church, and through deep friendships intentionally built. Do not isolate. Isolation feeds the fear. Pursue real community. Invest in friendships as seriously as some people invest in dating. Be the one who hosts the dinner, who shows up, who builds the chosen family. The belonging you long for may come in a form you did not expect, not a spouse, but a rich web of people who are truly yours. Ruth and Naomi were family to each other before Boaz ever appeared. And let yourself receive belonging as well as give it, which can be the harder half for a lonely heart. Sometimes, after enough disappointment, we quietly pull back, stop reaching out, stop letting people in, because it feels safer not to need anyone than to risk being let down again. But that self-protection slowly becomes its own prison. Let people get close. Accept the invitation even when it would be easier to stay home. Tell a trusted friend the truth about how lonely you have been, and let them into that real place. Because the belonging you long for cannot reach you through walls you have built to keep the disappointment out. It is worth the risk of being known. The family God sets the solitary in is not usually delivered to a closed door. It comes to the one who, scared as they are, keeps the door open. Fifth, pour your love outward. You have a great deal of love to give, and the ache of having no one obvious to give it to is real. But it is not the end of the matter. There are people all around you who need exactly the love you are carrying. Children, the elderly, the struggling, the lonely. Amy Carmichael's love, which might have gone to a husband and her own children, went instead to 900 who had no one, and her life was the richer for it, not the poorer. Find the place to spend your love. It will not come back empty. And there is a quiet mercy hidden in this, because love given away has a way of healing the one who gives it. When you are bent inward over your own ache, the loneliness grows. But when you turn outward and pour yourself into someone who needs you, something loosens, and you find, almost by surprise, that you are less alone than you were. Not because your circumstances changed, but because love, even love given to strangers, even love poured into children or the elderly or the forgotten, fills the one who gives it. The very capacity for love that has had no obvious place to go is not a curse, it is a treasure. And there is no shortage of people in this hurting world who are starving for exactly what you have to give. Spend it freely. You will find it is one of the surest paths out of the cave. Sixth, hold the longing before God without letting it become the thing you worship. It is good to want to be loved. Keep asking God for it honestly. Keep the desire open before Him, but guard your heart against letting that one longing become the master of your whole life, the thing you would do anything to get, even compromise your faith or your safety to escape the fear. Loneliness has driven people into far lonelier situations. Bad relationships entered out of fear of being alone. Do not let the fear push you into settling for something that would wound you. Trust God enough to wait for His best, even if His best, for now, is Himself. Hear this plainly, because it could spare you years of a deeper pain. There is a loneliness inside the wrong relationship that is far heavier than the loneliness of being single. To lie next to someone and feel unknown, unloved, unsafe, is a colder and more trapped loneliness than any empty house. Many who married out of fear of being alone have discovered this the hard way. So do not let the dread of solitude stampede you into handing your life to someone who does not honor you, or who would pull you away from your faith. or who is simply wrong, just because being with someone felt less frightening than being with no one. Being alone is not the worst thing that can happen to you. Being trapped with the wrong person is worse. Wait for God's best with your eyes open, and trust that the same God who sets the solitary in families can be trusted not to leave you in a worse place than the one the fear is trying to rush you out of. And seventh, take the future one day at a time, and let His promise hold the rest. The fear lives almost entirely in the imagined future, in all those empty years you cannot actually see. But you do not have to live them all tonight. You only have to live today, with God, and trust Him with the long road ahead. Take hold of the promise Amy took hold of, and say it back to the fear every time it rises. None of them that trust in me shall be desolate. You are trusting Him, so you will not be desolate. Not because you can see how, but because He said so, and He has never once broken His word to a soul that trusted Him. And when the fear rushes the future at you all at once, all those imagined empty years piled onto a single night, gently bring yourself back to the only day you have actually been given, which is this one. You are not asked to live 30 lonely years tonight. You are only asked to live tonight with God, and to trust Him with tomorrow, when tomorrow comes. The grace for the long road is not given all at once, in a lump you can see and hold. It is given a day at a time, like bread. Enough for today, and then enough again tomorrow. You do not need to know how you will face every lonely year ahead. You only need to know the one who will be with you in each of them as it comes. And He has promised to be. Now let me leave you with a blessing, and then I will let you go. Because you have carried this fear long enough, and it is time to set some of it down. May you know, in the deepest place where the fear lives, that your longing is not a flaw, and your aloneness is not a verdict, and your future is not the empty road the fear keeps painting. The God who said, "It is not good for you to be alone," is the God who sets the solitary in families, and He has not forgotten the corner of your heart that aches tonight. May you find, like Anna, that a life given to God is never an empty life, no matter how alone it looks from the outside, and that the years the world would pity can be the very years your soul grows closest to Him. May you discover, like Naomi, that the story you have named empty is one God is quietly weaving into something far larger and more beautiful than you can see from inside it. And may you take hold, like Amy in her cave, of the promise that none who trust Him shall be desolate, and find it true across all the years to come. May your Maker be your husband, the nearest companion of your soul, the one who is with you in the quiet house and the empty evening and the long night, closer than any human being could ever be. And may you live your one precious life fully, now, today, not in a waiting room, but out in the open, loving and building and belonging, while you trust the God who holds your future to do what He has always done, to set the solitary in families, and to never, ever leave the one who leans on Him. May the quiet of your home become, some evenings, not a loneliness, but a sanctuary, a place where you are not so much alone as alone with God. May the fear that has run ahead of you into all those empty years lose its grip as you learn to meet God in this day and trust Him with the rest. May you be surprised in the months and years to come by the belonging He brings you in the shapes you least expected. And may you come to the end of your life, however it unfolds, able to say what the frightened woman in the cave could say at the end of hers, that you trusted him, and you were not desolate, not for one day, because he was with you the whole way. And hold on to this. When the nights are long and the house is quiet, every ache for belonging that you feel in this life is, in the end, pointing past every human relationship to a belonging that has no end. The scripture promises a day when God himself will wipe away every tear, when the lonely will be gathered home, when those who trusted him will find themselves at last surrounded, known, and loved beyond anything this world could offer. At the great gathering where no one is left out and no one stands alone. Whatever your earthly story holds, that ending is sure for the one who belongs to God. The loneliness you feel now is real, but it is not the final word over your life. The final word is a homecoming, and a belonging so complete that every lonely night you ever spent will look, from there, like a small shadow that the morning swallowed up. You are walking toward that. You are not walking toward an empty end. You are walking toward the fullest belonging there has ever been, and the God who waits for you there is with you every step of the way to it. So set it down, friend. The fear of the empty years, the dread of growing old alone, the lie that you are unchosen and unseen. You do not have to be married, or partnered, or sure of your future, to be loved beyond measure tonight, to be held, to be known, to belong to the God who calls you his own. You are not forgotten. You are not desolate. And the one who said your aloneness is not good is with you in it. And he is not finished writing your story. Rest now, and come back whenever the fear gets loud and the house gets quiet. There will always be a light on here, and a word from the God who sets the solitary in families, and a place for you, just as you are. You're going to be all right. Not because you can see how the story ends, but because the God who set two lonely widows into the line of the Messiah and gave a frightened woman in a cave a family of 900 is your God, and he has promised that none who trust him will be desolate, and he has never broken that promise yet.